In a quiet, charming town hidden between rolling hills and lush woods, there lived a little girl called Adebimpe. She was noted for her beauty, her brilliant smile, and the dynamic energy she provided to everyone she encountered. But among her people, there was one aspect of hers that grabbed the greatest attention: her lips. Adebimpe's lips were huge, full, and naturally moulded in a manner that was unique to her. From an early age, she observed that her lips were different from the other youngsters. Her friends, while they adored her in many ways, would frequently talk behind her back or laugh any time she smiled too brightly. They didn't try to be unkind, but it was a reflection of how the culture around them prized some standards of beauty over others. The villagers, particularly the older ladies, would whisper about Adebimpe's lips, comparing her to the likes of others from remote areas whose lips were smaller, more delicate, and thought more acceptable. "Look at Adebimpe," they'd remark. "She could swallow a whole yam with those lips." Adebimpe didn't comprehend. She would frequently wonder why her lips generated so much attention. Were they not part of her? Did they not belong to her just as much as the eyes that twinkled with inquiry or the skin that shined like the moonlight? Her parents, extremely loving and supportive, soothed her when the taunting became too much. "Your lips, my dear, are a part of what makes you special," her mother would remark, smoothing her daughter's hair back. "No one else has them, and that's what makes you uniquely you." But despite her parents' support, the mockery remained. As Adebimpe got older, the murmurs became louder, the laughter harder, and the gaze more pointed. She began to suppress her grin. She learnt to keep her lips clenched, to speak gently and carefully, terrified that any outpouring of excitement would call attention to her flaw. Her confidence eventually started to wither as the taunting took its toll. One day, a young guy called Oluwaseun moved into the community. He was the son of a well-respected chief from a neighbouring town, and his family had recently migrated to reside on some property near the hamlet. When Oluwaseun first lay eyes on Adebimpe, he was struck by something he could not understand. There was a certain lightness in her presence, a warmth in her eyes, and something about her lips that he found enchanting. He would watch her from afar as she played with the other children in the village or sat beneath the shade of the ancient baobab tree, reading books with her head slightly cocked, as if she was in her own world. Despite his developing affection for her, Oluwaseun was aware of the local talk. He'd heard the mocking, the vicious words that were frequently aimed her way. What could he possibly see in her? The locals would question any time he was spotted near Adebimpe. A girl with such big lips doesn't belong with someone like him. But Oluwaseun wasn't like the other villagers. He had his own ideas of beauty, shaped not by tradition or fleeting trends, but by his heart. He saw something in Adebimpe that others didn't. Her confidence, even though it was hidden behind self-doubt, her intelligence, and most importantly, her kindness. Adebimpe was always ready to lend a hand, to comfort someone who was sad, or to offer advice to a younger child. Her heart was pure, and that was all that mattered to him. One evening, Oluwaseun gathered his courage and walked up to Adebimpe as she sat under the baobab tree, a book in her lap. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over everything. Adebimpe looked up, surprised by his presence. "Good evening, Adebimpe," Oluwaseun greeted her, his voice warm yet nervous. "Good evening," she replied quietly, looking down at her book. She wasn't used to being spoken to kindly by the young men in the village, and certainly not by someone of Oluwaseun's status. I was wondering if you would like to take a walk with me. I've seen you around, and I think you have a very unique beauty," he said, his voice a little uncertain. "I'd love to get to know you better." Adebimpe's heart skipped a beat. Could this be real? A guy like Oluwaseun, so gorgeous and well-spoken, wants to spend time with her? Her lips, which she had always been so self-conscious about, didn't seem to matter to him at all. Could it be that he actually liked her? For a moment, Adebimpe hesitated. She had been wounded so many times before. The murmurs, the mockery, it had all driven her shrink inside herself. But something in Oluwaseun's eyes informed her that he wasn't like the rest. Maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity for her to be free, to show the world the beauty that she had always kept concealed. "I'd like that," she murmured gently, her voice conveying a touch of eagerness. As they strolled together around the hamlet, Oluwaseun talked about his life in the adjacent town, his passion for the arts, and his ambitions for the future. Adebimpe listened with fascination, her heart slowly opening up to him. She found herself smiling more than she had in months, her lips extending into the broadest grin she had given herself in a long time. For the first time, Adebimpe didn't feel self-conscious. She wasn't hiding behind a facade of timidity or uncertainty. She was herself, in all her glory, her full lips a part of her, and Oluwaseun seemed to like it. But the real test came the next day, when Adebimpe went to the village market. Word had already spread that Oluwaseun had spent time with her, and the villagers were whispering. She could hear their voices as she walked past them, words laced with mockery and envy. "She's too bold, isn't she?" one woman said. "What does a man like that see in her? Look at those lips, she looks like a fish." Adebimpe's heart sank, and for a moment she almost turned back, but then she remembered Oluwaseun's words. He hadn't seen her lips as something wrong. He had seen them as part of the woman she was, and that made all the difference. When she returned home, her mother noticed her somber expression. "Adebimpe, what happened?" her mother inquired, worry in her voice. Adebimpe sat down next her. "The villagers. They laughed at me again. They called me names. They ridiculed my lips." Her mother grasped her hand gently. "My daughter, do not let the words of others determine your worth. You are gorgeous inside and out, and no one can take that from you. Remember, your lips are a part of your power. They enable you to express the truth, to sing the music of your heart. They are not something to conceal, but something to be proud of." That night, when Adebimpe laid in bed, she pondered seriously about her mother's remarks. Could it be true? Could her lips be a source of power rather than something to be embarrassed of? The following day, she strolled through the village with her head held high, her lips forming a grin as she welcomed the people around her. She wasn't going to let the rumours break her, not anymore. And as she did, she noticed a few familiar faces. Some of the older ladies, who had earlier derided her, now looked at her with a new sort of respect. They could sense the difference in her. She wasn't concealing anymore. But there was still one task remained. Would she have the strength to stand before the entire town and tell her truth, not just for herself, but for all the other girls who felt rejected because of something they could not change? That would be the actual test. Adebimpe's newfound confidence was delicate, but it was there, like the first blossoming of a flower in the spring. Every day she practiced standing straight, smiling without hesitation, and speaking with the calm power that had always been inside her, but had been buried for so long. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the old fears crept in, but each time she quieted them, she felt a little stronger. Word of Adebimpe's shift went rapidly around the town. The ladies who had earlier murmured behind her back now nodded politely as she passed. Some even smiled at her, while a few still glanced aside uncomfortably, unable to shake the judgment they had earlier harboured. But Adebimpe didn't mind. She understood that transformation required time. But the true difficulty came one afternoon at the local festival. The celebration was a long-standing custom when the people gathered to enjoy the harvest. It was a time of dancing, singing, and storytelling. Everyone gathered together to participate in the pleasure of the season, but there was always an underlying competitiveness in the air. Adebimpe had never participated in the festival before, not out of choice, but because she had always been too self-conscious to engage in the joy. She had always lurked in the background, willing to observe from the sidelines. This year, however, was different. She could sense the pull of something larger. She understood that if she was going to show to herself and to the people that her lips, her whole essence, were not something to conceal, now was the time. The prospect of entering into the heart of the event in front of everyone scared her. But the more she thought about it, the more she knew that it was precisely what she needed to do. Her pulse raced as she strolled into the crowded market square, where preparations for the celebration were well starting. The sound of laughing and music filled the air as youngsters rushed past, their faces painted with enthusiasm. Women were putting up food kiosks, while the men were adorning the festival grounds with colourful cloths and flowers. It was all a whirl of activity, but Adebimpe's mind was concentrated on one thing: what she was going to do. Oluwaseun had been at her side throughout this period, supporting her every step of the way. He had been her closest friend and confidant. His unflinching conviction in her had helped her gain the fortitude she needed to face the world. When Adebimpe conveyed her intention to him, his eyes shone with encouragement. "You're stronger than you know, Adebimpe," he continued. "The world is ready for you. Don't let fear stop you now." Adebimpe smiled at him, feeling a flood of warmth sweep over her. She could always depend on him to remind her of her value. As the event started, the local elder, Baba Ayotunde, called for the crowd's attention. "It is time for our yearly tradition," he said in his loud, booming voice. "The young ones shall come forth and share their talents. Let us enjoy their gifts." Adebimpe felt her heart throb in her chest. This was it. She had to act immediately or risk losing her bravery. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and proceeded into the middle of the square. The people grew hushed as they spotted her coming. Adebimpe could feel the weight of their gazes on her, the hushed whispers starting to grow in the air. She noticed some familiar faces, her friends, the children she had grown up with, even the older ladies who had formerly scoffed at her. They were all watching her, waiting to see what she would do. She stood before them all, feeling the eyes of the whole hamlet upon her. She was no longer a shy girl trying to hide. She was Adebimpe, the girl with the huge lips, the one who would no longer shrink away. For a long while, there was perfect quiet. Adebimpe cleared her throat. I've never stood in front of all of you like this," she started, her voice shaking at first but gaining courage with every syllable. "I've always been afraid of what you might think of me, of my lips. I've been ridiculed, rejected, laughed at. But now I stand here proud of who I am." The peasants were motionless, their eyes fixated on her. Some of them seemed uneasy, as if they weren't sure what to make of this. But Adebimpe pushed on. "My lips are a part of me," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "They are not too big. They are not a defect. They are mine, and I cherish them because they help me tell my truth. They enable me to grin, to sing, to convey my ideas. Without them, I would not be who I am." Adebimpe waited for a time, allowing her words to sink in. She could feel the weight of her message, the truth she had been suppressing for so long. It wasn't about her lips. It was about accepting oneself entirely, without shame. "I may not look like the other girls in this village, but I am beautiful in my own way," she remarked. "We all are. We all have something distinctive about ourselves, something that makes us remarkable. My lips are mine, and I will not allow anybody make me feel less because of them." There was a quiet silence in the air, and for a second Adebimpe worried she may have made a mistake. Had she gone too far? Had she spoken too boldly? But then something unexpected occurred. A lady in the audience, Mama Funke, who had always been one of the fiercest critics of Adebimpe's lips, went up. Her voice was quieter than it had been in years. "You are right, Adebimpe," she replied. "We are all different, and perhaps I've been wrong to judge you. Your lips are a part of you, just as much as your heart, and I know now that you are stronger than I ever knew." Adebimpe's heart filled with passion. Mama Funker's remarks were more than simply an apology. They were a sign of change, a hint that the community was starting to comprehend. One by one, people started to speak. The younger girls, who had earlier looked at Adebimpe with jealousy or uncertainty, now smiled at her with adoration. Even the guys who had earlier made crude comments about her lips now bowed in admiration. But the most startling moment occurred when Oluwaseun walked up, his voice firm and full with affection. "Adebimpe," he began, his stare never leaving her. "You are a woman of great strength. I've known it from the first moment I saw you. Your beauty is not characterized by your lips, but by your heart, your bravery, and your soul. And I want you to know that I am pleased to know you, proud to stand alongside you." The people gasped, and Adebimpe felt her cheeks heat. She had never anticipated that Oluwaseun would voice such things in front of the whole community, but it just made her heart leap. She wasn't simply embraced by one person, she was accepted by everyone. They saw her now, genuinely saw her, for who she was. And at that instant, Adebimpe recognized that she no longer needed to conceal. She didn't need to apologize for being herself. She didn't need to shrink. Her lips, once a sign of her rejection, had now become a symbol of her power. The event proceeded, but Adebimpe didn't need to compete with anybody. She had already achieved the biggest triumph, the victory of self-acceptance. And from that day on, Adebimpe became a beacon of hope for any young girl in the town who felt like they didn't fit the norm. She taught them that beauty comes in many forms, and that the things which make us distinct are often the qualities that make us the most powerful. The days following the festival passed in a flurry of renewed respect and silent jubilation. Adebimpe had showed the community something that they had never completely understood. True beauty wasn't something to be assessed by the size of lips, the shape of a nose, or the color of one's skin. It was about the power inside, the fortitude to be oneself despite the judgment of others. At first, the locals were unclear about how to behave. They had gotten so used to their own way of thinking, to the concept that beauty followed certain stringent criteria, that Adebimpe's daring had caught them by surprise. They didn't know how to cope with it, but with time, they learned to comprehend. Adebimpe continued to walk with her head held high, welcoming the people with a grin that she had long kept buried. She no longer avoided eye contact or turned away when someone gazed at her. She answered their gazes with confidence, and as she did, she observed something miraculous. Many of the individuals who had formerly ridiculed her, even gently, were now staring at her with respect. They had experienced the power of self-acceptance, and it had transformed them too. It wasn't just Adebimpe who had transformed, it was the entire hamlet. Oluwaseun was with her every step of the way. Their friendship had grown deeper, and the two of them regularly spent hours together, chatting about their hopes and the future. It was evident to everyone that they had something unique, something that went beyond friendship. There was a peaceful understanding between them, a connection that neither had to put into words. Adebimpe's heart fluttered every time he gazed at her with those warm, steady eyes. But even as Adebimpe's boldness developed, there were always occasions when the old anxieties sought to seep back in. She had not yet totally eradicated the scars of her past, and every now and again, the memories of being ridiculed would emerge. The laughing, the murmurs, the vicious comments, they were still there, lurking at the borders of her thoughts. One day, while Adebimpe sat beneath the baobab tree reading a book, a small girl approached her. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, her face full of inquiry and innocence. "Adebimpe," the girl questioned nervously, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, my dear," Adebimpe said, beaming kindly at the small one. The girl paused, then said, her voice gentle but filled with a combination of adoration and bewilderment. "Why? Why do people talk about your lips? I don't think they're horrible at all. In fact, they're wonderful, but everyone else says they claim they're too big." Adebimpe felt an ache in her heart. The inquiry was simple, but it reminded her of the years she had spent hiding, embarrassed of the very thing that had made her special. She took a big breath and gazed at the child, her voice quiet and gentle. "Sometimes people say things about others because they don't understand them," Adebimpe stated kindly. "But our differences are what make us special. My lips are a part of me, just as your eyes are a part of you. They don't make me any less lovely. In fact, they make me Adebimpe, and I wouldn't swap it for anything." The child grinned warmly, her eyes gleaming with comprehension. "I think you're right," she replied gently. "You're very beautiful, Adebimpe." Adebimpe's heart swelled. It was times like these, when the next generation could recognize her for who she actually was, that she felt the most proud. She wasn't simply transforming herself, she was altering the way others perceived the world. But even as she had begun to make a difference, Adebimpe recognized that the route to genuine empowerment was a long one. The world was full of judgment, and there would always be those who clung to old values. It was not enough for her to just feel good about herself. She had to continue the job of breaking down those boundaries, of showing the world that beauty is not one size fits all. Adebimpe started to talk more freely about her experience, sharing her narrative with everyone who would listen. She would tell the young girls in the hamlet about her troubles, how she had previously felt as though her lips were something to conceal. And then she would tell them how she learnt to love them, how she realized that her value didn't come from the approval of others, but from inside herself. One evening, when the sun fell below the horizon, Oluwaseun strolled up to her. He had been watching her talk to a gathering of young girls, all of whom were listening closely to her remarks. He waited calmly for a time before approaching her. "You're incredible," he whispered quietly, his voice overflowing with respect. Adebimpe turned to him, her heart fluttering. "I'm just telling them what I've learned. If I can assist one person see themselves the way they actually are, it's worth it." Oluwaseun grinned. Years passed, and Adebimpe's name became associated with strength, bravery, and self-empowerment in the hamlet. What had once been a little, quiet shift in one young lady had spread across the whole neighborhood, impacting everyone it touched. The community had changed, and so had the inhabitants. Adebimpe had not only learnt to love herself, but she had also showed others how to do the same. It wasn't just about physical attractiveness, it was about respecting oneself from the inside out, no matter what anybody else said or thought. She had become a mentor to many young girls who suffered with their own anxieties, particularly those who thought they didn't fit into the restricted ideals of beauty that society sought to impose. Adebimpe taught them that their individuality was their strength, and that they didn't have to apologize for who they were. She arranged meetings beneath the shade of the baobab tree, where women and girls of all ages would come together to exchange tales, learn from one another, and remind each other of their value. Oluwaseun had become a vital part of her life, not just as a friend, but as a partner. They had developed something wonderful together, a friendship centered on mutual respect, trust, and love. Though they had never openly labeled their relationship, it was evident to everyone in the hamlet that Adebimpe and Oluwaseun were meant to be. They frequently spent their days working side by side, whether it was constructing new houses for people in need or arranging events to bring the community closer together. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Adebimpe's house, watching the sun set behind the hills, Oluwaseun looked to her, his eyes full with adoration. "Adebimpe," he murmured gently, his voice calm but loaded with passion. "I've watched you grow into someone who is not just beautiful on the outside, but truly beautiful on the inside. You've transformed this hamlet, and you've changed me. I can't picture my life without you." Adebimpe's heart swelled. She had never expected to discover love in the manner she had with Oluwaseun, but now, as she looked at him, she knew that love, true love, wasn't about being flawless. It was about meeting someone who recognized and respected you for who you actually were. Someone who helped you become the finest version of yourself. "I never thought I'd get to this point," Adebimpe said, her voice overflowing with sorrow. "I spent so many years hiding, thinking that I wasn't worthy of love or acceptance, but you helped me know that I was worthy all along, not because of how I seem, but because of who I am. And today, I'm pleased to be me." Oluwaseun leaned over and grasped her hand, his thumb lightly caressing her knuckles. "I've always been proud of you, Adebimpe. You've showed us all that genuine beauty is about confidence, strength, and accepting who we are. You've made this community a better place, and I'll always be at your side." And so, united, they resumed their journey, hand in hand, heart to heart. The love they shared was a monument to the power of self-acceptance, a love that grew stronger each day, just as Adebimpe's spirit did. As the years went by, Adebimpe's impact moved beyond the community. She was asked to speak in different towns and villages, sharing her tale with people who needed to hear it. She talked to young girls, women, and even men, reminding them that everyone has a unique beauty, something that should never be concealed or ignored. She became a symbol of hope and change, not only for her town, but for many who had been told they didn't fit the model. One day, many years after that life-changing festival, Adebimpe stood on the same land where she had previously spoken in front of the whole town. The baobab tree, still standing strong, was a mute witness to her change. She was older now, wiser, yet her energy had not waned. She glanced out at the faces before her, young and old, and smiled. "A long time ago, I stood before you all," she started, her voice firm and steady. "And I told you that my lips were not something to be ashamed of, that they were a part of me, and that I was beautiful exactly as I was. But now I want to tell you something else. We are all lovely in our own way, every single one of us. Our attractiveness isn't determined by what others think of us, but by how we view ourselves." She waited for a bit, allowing her words sink in. "I stand here today not because I'm perfect, not because I have all the answers, but because I have learned to love myself. And that's what I want you all to remember. No matter where you come from, no matter what you've been taught, you are worthy. You are enough. Your distinctiveness is your strength." The audience was quiet, but in their eyes, Adebimpe saw something she hadn't seen before: complete acceptance. The residents of the hamlet had come to grasp the truth of her words, and they had welcomed it with open hearts. Adebimpe's path had not only been about her personal progress, but about the change of a whole community. The mocking words, the rejection, the judgment, they had all vanished into the past, replaced by a strong feeling of pride and solidarity. And in her heart, Adebimpe understood that her task wasn't done. There were still many people out there who needed to hear her tale, who needed to realize that they too could embrace their own beauty. But for now, she stood there, pleased. She had discovered peace with herself, and in doing so, had helped others find peace as well. Oluwaseun stood by her side, his hand softly resting on her shoulder. He had always been her strongest supporter, and now, as they gazed out over the town together, they knew that the future was bright. Not just for them, but for everyone they had touched. As the sun fell below the horizon, throwing a golden light over the settlement, Adebimpe grinned. She had finally discovered the freedom to be herself, and in doing so, she had become the exact change she had hoped to see in the world. And so, Adebimpe's legacy lived on, not only in the tales that were told about her, but in the hearts of everyone she had inspired. Her huge lips, once a cause of humiliation, had become a sign of power, beauty, and bravery. She had not only altered herself, but had helped a whole community learn to appreciate their diversity and love themselves as they were.